The crisp autumn breeze scattered crimson leaves across the immaculately maintained cemetery grounds of Oakwood Memorial Gardens, a secluded sanctuary for Boston's elite. Alexander Morgan, CEO of Morgan Innovations, a tech empire valued at $4.2 billion, stood motionless before his mother's grave, his tall figure a solitary silhouette against the setting sun. The polished granite headstone read, Eleanor Morgan, 1952-2022, beloved mother. Simple words that could never capture the complicated relationship they had shared. Alexander adjusted the collar of his bespoke charcoal overcoat, a defense against both the October chill and the discomfort of this annual pilgrimage. His visits were clockwork precise, once a year, on his mother's birthday. 20 minutes of silent contemplation before returning to his penthouse overlooking the harbor. Eleanor had passed away 14 months ago, leaving Alexander as the sole remaining Morgan, a dynasty built on technological innovation and carefully guarded privacy. At 52, Alexander had conquered the business world with ruthless efficiency. His company's artificial intelligence platforms powered everything from medical diagnostics to financial markets. Fortune magazine had recently crowned him America's most successful solitary genius, a title that acknowledged both his brilliance and his notoriously private personal life. No wives, no children, no public romances, just the relentless pursuit of excellence and innovation. The sound of small footsteps crunching through fallen leaves broke his reverie. Alexander frowned. He had specifically requested privacy for this visit, arranging for the cemetery to be closed to other visitors for 1 hour. His security team waited discreetly by the entrance gates, 200 yards away. Turning slightly, he noticed a small figure approaching the same grave. A child, a girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with curly chestnut hair partially hidden under a navy blue knit cap. She carried a modest bouquet of white lilies wrapped in simple brown paper. Alexander watched, frozen in disbelief, as the girl knelt beside his mother's headstone and carefully arranged the flowers against it. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sharper than intended. "What are you doing here?" The girl looked up, unperturbed by his tone. Her eyes were a striking amber brown, intelligent and somehow familiar. She wore a practical navy peacoat over jeans and sneakers. "I'm visiting Grandma," she replied matter-of-factly. "I bring flowers every month. She liked lilies best." Alexander felt the ground shift beneath his expensive Italian leather shoes. "Grandma," he repeated, the word foreign on his tongue. The girl nodded, her expression earnest. "Mom couldn't come today. She's working extra shifts at the hospital this week. But Grandma told me in a dream that I should still come." She extended a small hand. "I'm Sophie. You must be Uncle Alex. Grandma had your picture on her nightstand. My name is Theo Teller, and if this introduction has already sparked your curiosity, leave your like to follow the unfolding of this extraordinary journey. Which city are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments below." Alexander stared at the child's outstretched hand, his mind racing through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Uncle Alex. The title was as unfamiliar as it was impossible. He had no siblings, at least none that he knew of. His mother had raised him alone after his father abandoned them when Alexander was just 3 years old. "There must be some mistake," he said, not taking Sophie's hand. "Eleanor Morgan was my mother, and she had only one child, me." Sophie's hand slowly dropped, but her amber gaze remained steady. "Grandma said you might not know about us. She told Mom it was complicated." She touched the polished granite of the headstone with small, reverent fingers. "But she loved you very much. She kept all your magazine covers." Alexander's carefully constructed world began to crack. His mother, his pragmatic, reserved mother, had led a secret life, had maintained a relationship with a granddaughter without ever mentioning her existence to him. "Who was your mother?" he asked, his CEO voice taking over, the one that commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors. "Rebecca Winters," Sophie answered, seeming immune to his tone. "She's a pediatric nurse at Massachusetts General. Grandma Eleanor was her mom too." The cemetery around them suddenly felt vast and airless. Rebecca Winters. The name meant nothing to him, yet according to this child, they shared the same mother, a half-sister he never knew existed. "That's impossible," Alexander said, more to himself than to Sophie. "I would have known." "Mom said Grandma made a difficult choice a long time ago," Sophie replied, with the straightforward wisdom of a child. "Before you were born. She said it wasn't your fault." From his coat pocket, Alexander's phone vibrated, likely his executive assistant reminding him of the board meeting scheduled in 90 minutes. For the first time in his professional life, Alexander ignored it. "Where do you live, Sophie?" he asked, softening his approach. "Medford," she replied. "It's not far. We have a small apartment near Mom's hospital. Grandma used to visit us on Sundays for dinner." A shadow crossed her face. "I miss those dinners." Alexander calculated quickly. Medford was indeed close, less than 7 miles from his mother's Beacon Hill townhouse, where she had lived until her death. How many Sundays had Eleanor excused herself from his occasional dinner invitations, claiming fatigue or bridge club commitments? How long had this parallel life existed? "Does your mother know you're here alone?" he asked, suddenly concerned about the child's safety. Sophie nodded. "Mom trusts me. I'm very responsible." She said it with such unironic seriousness that Alexander almost smiled, despite his internal turmoil. "The cemetery is on my way home from school, and Mom gets my location on her phone." Modern parenting, Alexander thought. So different from his own regimented upbringing. Sophie reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a small, worn photograph. "This is me with Mom and Grandma last Christmas," she said, offering it to him. It was Grandma's last Christmas. With uncharacteristically unsteady hands, Alexander accepted the photograph. There was his mother, thinner than he remembered, but unmistakably Eleanor Morgan, seated between a woman in her late 30s and Sophie. They were wearing matching red sweaters, their faces alight with genuine happiness. Alexander couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his mother smile like that. The woman in the photograph, Rebecca, had Eleanor's high cheekbones and the same slight tilt to her eyes. There was no denying the resemblance. Alexander felt a surge of emotions he couldn't immediately classify. Betrayal, confusion, anger, and something else. A strange, hollow ache for what he had never known existed. "May I keep this?" he asked, his voice unusually quiet. Sophie hesitated. "It's my only copy," she admitted. "But I could ask Mom to make another one for you." Alexander nodded, returning the photograph with reluctance. His analytical mind was already working through the implications. If Rebecca was indeed his half-sister, born before him, was yet his mother kept her existence secret, the timeline didn't make sense unless a cold realization washed over him. What if Rebecca wasn't born before him? What if she was born after, and his mother had started another family, while maintaining the pretense of being a devoted single parent to him? "Sophie, how old is your mother?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "She's 42, Sophie replied. "Her birthday is in March." She paused, studying his face with unsettling perception. "You look worried. Grandma said you always worried too much about things you couldn't control." Alexander felt his jaw tighten. That sounded exactly like one of Eleanor's crisp assessments of his character. She had never approved of his need to micromanage every aspect of his life and business. "Planning isn't worrying," had been his standard retort. 42. Alexander was 52. The mathematics was simple. His mother had given birth to Rebecca when he was 10 years old. The same year, his father had allegedly abandoned them. The same year, Eleanor had sent him to boarding school, citing the need for stability in his education, while she sorted out their new lives. His childhood memories rearranged themselves like pieces of a puzzle, finally finding their proper places. His mother's unexplained illness that had lasted several months. The abrupt move from their suburban home to the city apartment. The new job at the university that kept her working long hours. "Did your mother ever mention my father?" Alexander asked, unable to stop himself from probing deeper into this newly discovered family history. Sophie shook her head. Mom doesn't know who her father is. Grandma never told her. She looked down at the gravestone. Mom said some secrets are meant to stay buried, but I think everyone deserves to know where they come from. The wisdom from this child's mouth struck Alexander like a physical blow. From the most unexpected source came the simplest truths. Everyone deserves to know where they come from. He had spent his entire adult life believing he knew exactly who he was. Alexander Morgan, self-made billionaire, sole heir to Eleanor Morgan's modest estate and immense pride. Now standing in the shadow of his mother's headstone, that identity felt fragile and incomplete. The cemetery's security guard appeared at the edge of the path, gesturing respectfully to indicate that Alexander's reserved time was coming to an end. Public visiting hours would resume shortly. I need to speak with your mother, Alexander said, reaching into his wallet and extracting a business card, a simple white rectangle bearing only his name and private number. Could you give her this and ask her to call me? Sophie took the card, examining the embossed text with interest. You don't have a very interesting business card for such an important person, she observed candidly. Mom has a card with a cartoon nurse on it. The kids at the hospital love it. Despite everything, Alexander felt a genuine smile forming, the first in what felt like months. Perhaps I should consider a redesign, he replied, surprising himself with the quip. Sophie's phone chimed with a text message alert. She pulled it from her pocket, checked the screen, and looked up at Alexander. It's Mom. She's finished her shift early and is waiting for me at the cemetery entrance. The girl gathered her small backpack. Would you like to meet her? The question hung in the air between them, deceptively simple yet monumentally complex. Alexander Morgan, who made multi-million-dollar decisions daily without hesitation, found himself paralyzed by this child's straightforward invitation. Meeting Rebecca would make this situation real, irrevocable. Part of him wanted to retreat to the familiar comfort of his structured life, to dismiss this encounter as a bizarre coincidence or misunderstanding. I have a board meeting, he said automatically, then immediately regretted the corporate reflex. Sophie's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes dimmed slightly. Grandma said you were always very busy. That's why she didn't want to bother you with us. The words struck with precision, cutting through layers of practiced detachment. Had his mother truly believed he was too busy for family? Or had there been other reasons for her secrecy, reasons that might reflect poorly on her choices or on him? My meeting can wait, Alexander heard himself say, the decision crystallizing as the words left his mouth. Morgan Innovations had operated without him for exactly 3 sick days in 15 years. It could survive one postponed board meeting. As they walked together toward the cemetery entrance, Alexander noticed how Sophie's gait occasionally mimicked his own measured stride, before reverting to a more childlike bounce. She chatted easily about her school, a public elementary where she excelled at mathematics and science, but struggled with art, because my trees always looked like broccoli. The ordinariness of her concerns created a surreal contrast to the extraordinary circumstances of their meeting. At the ornate iron gates, a woman in scrubs covered by a caramel-colored trench coat stood waiting. Even from a distance, Alexander could see the resemblance to the photograph, and to his mother. Rebecca Winters had Eleanor's posture, that same straight-backed poise that had been drilled into Alexander throughout his childhood. When Rebecca spotted them approaching together, her expression transformed from casual expectancy to shock. She stepped forward quickly, protectively, her gaze darting between her daughter and the man she clearly recognized. Sophie, come here, please, she called, her voice controlled but tight with tension. The girl seemed oblivious to the undercurrents. Mom, this is Uncle Alex. He was visiting Grandma, too. Rebecca's face paled. Sophie, wait in the car for a moment. It's just there. She pointed to a modest blue Honda parked nearby. But Mom, please, Sophie, just for a few minutes. The girl sighed dramatically but complied, giving Alexander a small wave before skipping to the car. As soon as Sophie was out of earshot, Rebecca turned to face him fully. "Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice remarkably steady, "I imagine you have questions." Alexander studied her face. This stranger who shared his blood. Her eyes were like his mother's, but her mouth and jawline reminded him of his own reflection. There was no question they were related. "Did she know?" he asked simply. Rebecca didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Your mother?" She nodded. Yes, she knew about Sophie from the beginning. She was there the day Sophie was born. The confirmation landed like a physical blow. His mother, his reserved, proper mother, had maintained a relationship with a granddaughter while never once mentioning their existence to him. "We should talk," Alexander said, gesturing toward his waiting town car, where his driver stood at attention. "I can have my driver take Sophie for ice cream with my security detail. They're extremely trustworthy." Rebecca's laugh was short and incredulous. "I've just met you. I'm not sending my daughter off with strangers, even if they are on your payroll." She glanced at Sophie waiting in the car, then back to Alexander. "There's a cafe across from the cemetery. We can talk there while Sophie has her homework snack." Alexander was momentarily taken aback by the refusal. People rarely said no to him, but he recognized the maternal protectiveness in her stance. It reminded him uncomfortably of how Eleanor had once defended him from his father's criticisms. Stories like this remind us of the unexpected connections that can change our lives in an instant. If you believe in the power of such moments, consider subscribing to not miss what happens next. The cafe's worn charm stood in stark contrast to the sterile, minimalist establishments Alexander typically frequented. Mismatched vintage chairs surrounded wooden tables scarred with years of use. The walls displayed local artwork for sale, price tags dangling discreetly from their frames. A chalkboard menu advertised fair trade coffee and homemade pastries with playful names like Procrastination Pecan Pie and Deadline Dodger Donuts. Sophie settled at a corner table with a hot chocolate topped with a mountain of whipped cream and a math workbook. From their position at a nearby table, Alexander could observe her diligently working through equations while periodically taking triumphant sips of her beverage, leaving a whipped cream mustache in her wake. "She's quite good at mathematics," Rebecca said, following his gaze. "Gets that from your side, I suppose. I was always more inclined toward literature." "Our mother excelled at both," Alexander replied automatically, then paused at the strange intimacy of the plural possessive. "Our mother." The server delivered their coffee, an artisanal pour-over for Alexander, and a simple latte for Rebecca. Neither spoke until the young man retreated. "I don't know where to begin," Rebecca finally said, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic mug. "I always imagined this conversation happening someday. But not like this. Not because Sophie took it upon herself to introduce herself to her uncle. Perhaps we start with the basics," Alexander suggested, falling back on the methodical approach that had served him well in business. "You are my half-sister?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes. Born in 1983. Eleanor Morgan is my biological mother. I don't know who my father was. She never told me. And she kept you a secret from me, just as she kept me a secret from you." Rebecca's expression softened with something that looked unsettlingly like pity. "No, Alexander. She didn't keep you a secret from me. I knew about you my entire life. She kept photos of you in our home. She spoke of you often, your accomplishments, your brilliance." Each word landed like a calculated blow. His mother had acknowledged Rebecca's existence to Rebecca, had shared details of Alexander's life with her, while maintaining absolute silence about Rebecca to him. The asymmetry of the deception was staggering. "I don't understand," he said, a phrase that had perhaps never crossed his lips in a professional context. "Why would she tell you about me but not tell me about you?" Rebecca sighed, stirring her latte absently. "It's complicated. Eleanor, our mother, made choices she felt were necessary at the time." She hesitated. What do you know about your father's departure? Very little, Alexander admitted. I was young. She told me he left us when I was free. She rarely spoke of him. Rebecca nodded slowly. That's not quite accurate. Your father didn't simply leave when you was free. He discovered Eleanor was pregnant with another man's child and filed for divorce. The cafe's ambient noise seemed to recede as the implications became clear. With you, Alexander said. She was pregnant with you. Yes. According to what she told me, your father gave her an ultimatum. Terminate the pregnancy or lose everything, including custody of you. He was a powerful man with influential connections. Alexander's mind raced back through fragmented childhood memories. His father, Richard Morgan, had indeed been well connected, a senior partner at a prestigious law firm with political ambitions, the kind of man who valued appearances above all else. She found a third option, Rebecca continued. She gave me up for adoption to distant family friends who couldn't have children of their own, the Winters family. They lived across town, far enough to maintain separation, but close enough that she could be part of my life in a limited way. As I understand it, the official story was that she had gone away to care for a sick relative during her pregnancy. Alexander remembered that absence, nearly 6 months when he had stayed with his father's sister, while his mother was allegedly caring for an ailing aunt in Chicago. When Eleanor returned, his parents' marriage had already been deteriorating, culminating in the divorce that sent him to boarding school at 10. When your father eventually left anyway, she maintained the separation to protect your inheritance and social position, Rebecca explained. His family had significant influence over the trust that funded your education and eventual business ventures. There were conditions attached. Alexander's coffee cooled untouched before him. His empire, built with his intelligence and determination, yes, but initially funded by the Morgan family trust that had been his safety net and launching pad. Had that truly been his mother's motivation, protecting his financial future at the cost of family connection? And you accepted this arrangement? He asked, unable to keep a note of accusation from his voice. Rebecca's eyes flashed, the first sign of anger. I was a child, just as you were. By the time I was old enough to question it, the pattern was established. My adoptive parents were wonderful people who gave me a good life. Eleanor supported me emotionally and later financially. She helped me through nursing school. She was there when Sophie was born. She leaned forward slightly. I didn't know she had kept me from you entirely. I thought you knew I existed, but weren't interested in a relationship with your illegitimate half-sister. The accusation, even as a misunderstanding, stung with unexpected sharpness. Alexander, who prided himself on emotional control, felt a surge of defensive anger. That's absurd, he said, his voice low but intense. I knew nothing of your existence until today. If I had known I had a sister... He trailed off, unsure how to complete the sentence truthfully. What would he have done? Welcomed her with open arms, maintained a polite distance. His hypothetical reaction was impossible to predict, because the man he had become had been shaped precisely by the absence of such family connections. Rebecca watched him carefully, her expression softening. I believe you, she said finally. The look on your face when you saw Sophie and me together, that wasn't acting, and looking back there were signs. Eleanor was always vague about why you and I couldn't meet. She would say things like, Alexander is focused on his career right now, or the timing isn't right. Alexander's phone vibrated insistently in his pocket, the fourth call from his executive assistant in the past 30 minutes. The board meeting would be starting without him, an unprecedented occurrence. He silenced the device without checking it. And Sophie's father? He asked, glancing at the girl still absorbed in her math homework. A shadow crossed Rebecca's face. James was a surgical resident when we met. Brilliant doctor, terrible partner. He wasn't ready for fatherhood. She offered a small, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. He sees Sophie twice a year. His birthday and hers. Sends support checks regularly. I'll give him that. Alexander nodded, recognizing the practiced neutrality in her tone, the same tone his mother had used when speaking of his absent father. History repeating itself in unexpected ways. Last August, Rebecca continued, when Eleanor was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and given months to live, I thought she might finally bring us all together, but she insisted on maintaining the separation. She said it would be cruel to introduce us, only to immediately trigger the grief of her loss. Rebecca shook her head. I disagreed, but I respected her wishes. It was her secret to keep or reveal. She died alone, Alexander said abruptly, the memory suddenly sharp and painful, in her townhouse. I had arranged for round-the-clock nursing care, but she sent them away that night. Said she wanted privacy. When the morning nurse arrived, she was gone. Rebecca's eyes widened. No, Alexander, she wasn't alone. Her voice caught. I was with her. Sophie and I both were. We'd been staying with her those final weeks. The nurse you hired was only there during the day. Eleanor asked me to make sure we were gone before the nurse came each morning to maintain the separation. Alexander felt as though the floor beneath him had dropped away. Even in her final moments, his mother had maintained the charade. He had sat by her hospital bed during her treatments, had handled her financial affairs, had visited regularly, always finding her alone, always believing he was her only family support. I sat with her while she died, Rebecca said quietly. She spoke of you at the end, said you were her greatest pride, that all her life's decisions, right or wrong, had been to secure your future. An image formed in Alexander's mind, his mother's hand, so frail in those final weeks, clutching a worn silver locket she had suddenly insisted on wearing. He had assumed it contained a photo of her own mother. Had it instead held an image of Rebecca or Sophie, the family she kept closest to her heart, even while keeping them separate from him? I found this in her bedside drawer after she died, Rebecca said, reaching into her purse. She withdrew a sealed envelope, ivory-colored and heavy with expensive stationery, Eleanor's preferred correspondence medium. It's addressed to you. She asked me to mail it 6 months after her passing, but I've been unable to do it. I didn't know if it would hurt more than help. She placed the envelope on the table between them. It seems fate had other plans. Alexander stared at his name written in his mother's elegant script, the same handwriting that had addressed birthday cards and occasional letters during his years at boarding school. What final words had she crafted for him? What explanation or justification for a lifetime of separation? Sophie approached their table, math workbook in hand. I finished my homework, she announced proudly. Can I have another hot chocolate? The mundane request pulled Alexander from the precipice of what felt like an emotional abyss. Here was the present, a living legacy, while he teetered on the edge of a past he couldn't change. Actually, Rebecca said, glancing at her watch, we should get going. You have piano at 5:30. She looked at Alexander apologetically. Ms. Abernathy is very strict about punctuality. Piano, Alexander repeated, latching onto this ordinary detail. You play piano, Sophie? The girl nodded enthusiastically. Grandma got me lessons for my birthday last year. She said you played when you were my age, too. Another connection, another parallel he hadn't known existed. Alexander had indeed played throughout his childhood, one of the few artistic pursuits his mother had insisted upon, despite his father's dismissal of it as impractical. I still play occasionally, he admitted. It helps me think. This was true, though few knew it. A baby grand piano occupied a corner of his penthouse, often his only companion during late-night strategic planning sessions. Maybe you could come hear me play sometime, Sophie suggested, with the direct simplicity of childhood. I'm learning Beethoven's Für Elise. It's really hard. Alexander looked to Rebecca, uncertain how to respond. The woman who believed he had deliberately ignored her existence for decades who had every reason to want nothing to do with him, gave a small nod of permission. "I would like that," he told Sophie, surprising himself with his sincerity. 2 weeks passed before Alexander found the courage to open his mother's letter. It sat on his desk in his home office, positioned between a scale model of Morgan Innovation's forthcoming headquarters and a Crystal Award for Technological Innovation. During those 14 days, Alexander Morgan, a man renowned for decisive action, found himself paralyzed by indecision. The revelation of Rebecca and Sophie's existence had disrupted every aspect of his carefully ordered life. Board meetings that once commanded his complete attention now found him distracted by memories of Sophie's amber eyes or Rebecca's measured voice, explaining their mother's impossible choices. He had postponed 3 international trips, delegated critical negotiations to his executive team, and, most shocking to his employees, had begun leaving the office by 6 o'clock. His executive assistant of 15 years, Margaret, had actually asked if he was ill. The ivory envelope waited, his mother's elegant handwriting a silent accusation. What truths or lies did it contain? What possible explanation could justify a lifetime of separation? On the 14th night after meeting Sophie at the cemetery, Alexander poured himself 3 fingers of the 30-year-old Macallan his mother had given him on his 50th birthday. For significant moments, she had said, if confronting her final words didn't qualify as significant, nothing would. With a letter opener that had belonged to his grandfather, he carefully slit the envelope and withdrew 3 pages of his mother's stationery, covered in her distinctive penmanship. My dear Alexander, if you are reading this, then I'm gone, and Rebecca has found the courage I lacked in life, or perhaps fate has intervened in ways I cannot predict. Either way, you now know the truth, or at least parts of it. Allow me to fill in what remains. I have lived a life divided, my heart split between 2 children whom I could never bring together. You, the brilliant son who followed so precisely in the path I laid out for you, and Rebecca, the daughter whose very existence was evidence of my greatest transgression. You deserve to know the full truth of your origins, though I fear it may cause you pain. Your father, Richard, was not the man you believe him to be. Our marriage was arranged through family connections, a union of convenience rather than love. He was cruel in ways that left no visible marks, controlling in ways that isolated me from friends and family. When you were 2 years old, I met James Wilson, a professor of literature at the university where I taught mathematics. He showed me kindness when I had forgotten what it felt like to be valued. Our affair was brief but profound. When I discovered I was pregnant with Rebecca, I knew immediately that the child was James's, not Richard's. Your father had been away at a political conference during the only possible time of conception. When I confessed my condition, hoping for understanding or at least civility, Richard's rage was terrifying. He threatened to take you from me permanently, to ruin James professionally, to leave me destitute. His family's influence could have accomplished all 3. I made the only choice I felt I could. I agreed to give up my daughter for adoption after birth, to save both my children from worse fates. The Winters family, distant cousins of my college roommate, were unable to have children of their own and agreed to adopt Rebecca while allowing me limited contact. It was an unusual arrangement, but one that allowed me to maintain some connection to my daughter while protecting you and your future. Richard filed for divorce regardless, once his political aspirations required a more socially advantageous wife. The separation agreement included your continued access to the Morgan Family Trust for Education, the foundation that later helped you build your company, provided I maintained certain standards of propriety. Any scandal, including the revelation of an illegitimate daughter, would void those provisions. By the time you were established enough that the trust no longer mattered, the patterns were set. Rebecca had her own family. You had built your empire. and I had constructed elaborate justifications for my continued silence. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is that you would have loved each other had you been allowed to meet. You and Rebecca share not just my blood, but many of my traits, my determination, my analytical mind, my terrible impatience with incompetence. Sophie has your musical talent and your curiosity about how things work. She takes apart electronics just to reassemble them, much as you did at her age. I told myself I was protecting both of you with my silence. The truth is more selfish. I feared your judgment. I feared that knowing the choices I made would diminish your love for me. I chose the comfortable familiarity of our established relationship over the messy honesty that might have given you the family you deserved. My final request is not for forgiveness. That must be earned, not requested. Instead, I ask only that you consider opening your life to the family you never knew existed. Rebecca has raised a remarkable daughter, despite limited resources and support. They are your blood, Alexander, and in them you might find what has been missing in your life of solitary achievement. You have built an empire of technology, my brilliant son. Now perhaps you can build something more enduring, a family bound by choice rather than obligation. With eternal love and regret, Eleanor Morgan. Alexander set the letter down, his vision blurred with unexpected tears. The crystal tumbler in his hand reflected the dim light of his desk lamp, the amber liquid within untouched. His mother's voice seemed to echo in the silent room. Not the carefully controlled voice of his childhood, but the raw, honest voice that had finally emerged from beyond the grave. His phone screen illuminated with an incoming message. Rebecca had texted him Sophie's piano recital schedule for the following Saturday, along with a tentative invitation to attend if he was interested. He had exchanged cautious texts with Rebecca over the past 2 weeks, superficial communications about Sophie's interests or neutral family history. Neither had pushed for more, respecting the enormity of what they were both processing. Alexander's thumb hovered over the message. Throughout his life, business decisions had been made through careful analysis of risk versus reward, of potential gain weighed against possible loss. But this was different. No spreadsheet or algorithm could calculate the implications of allowing himself to care about these strangers who were also his closest blood relations. His mother's words echoed in his mind. You have built an empire of technology. Now perhaps you can build something more enduring. With unexpected certainty, Alexander typed his response. I'll be there. Should I bring anything? Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, I'd like to take you both to dinner afterward, if you're available. The response came almost immediately. Just yourself. Sophie will be ecstatic. Dinner sounds lovely. Then a second message appeared. She has your eyes, you know. Mom always said so. Alexander set down his phone and finally raised the whiskey glass in a silent toast to his mother, to her flaws and secrets, her love and sacrifices. He took a small sip of the aged spirit, feeling its warmth spread through his chest as he contemplated the complications and possibilities that lay ahead. The Morgan Innovations Board could wait. The quarterly projections could wait. The expansion into Asian markets could wait. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Morgan had found something that technology couldn't replicate and money couldn't buy. A chance to rewrite the story he had believed was already fully written. The Medford Community Music School occupied a converted Victorian mansion on a tree-lined street. Its grand facade, with ornate gingerbread trim painted in cheerful yellows and blues, stood in stark contrast to the sleek modernism of Alexander's usual environments. Inside, the formal parlors and dining rooms had been transformed into practice studios and performance spaces while maintaining their vintage charm. Alexander arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal suit, that while among his most casual, still marked him as distinctly out of place among the parents in jeans and casual wear. He had spent more time deciding what to wear to this children's recital than he had for his last meeting with the Japanese finance minister. The small auditorium, once the mansion's ballroom, buzzed with the energy of excited children and chatting parents. A modest stage held a grand piano that had seen better days, its ebony finish dulled by years of eager fingers. Chairs were arranged in uneven rows, programs balanced precariously on each seat. Alexander selected a chair near the back, instinctively seeking the anonymity that had become second nature. A text message from Rebecca guided him forward instead. "We saved you a seat. Third row, aisle." Making his way toward the front, Alexander caught sight of Rebecca waving discreetly. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back in a casual knot. Beside her sat an elderly couple he didn't recognize, their faces lighting up with curiosity as he approached. "Alexander," Rebecca greeted him, her voice warm but tinged with nervousness. "These are Robert and Marie Winters, my adoptive parents." She hesitated before adding, "Our mother's chosen family for me." Robert Winters stood, extending a weathered hand. In his late 70s, he carried himself with the straight posture of a former military man, though his eyes held unexpected gentleness. "We've heard about you for years," he said, his handshake firm. "It's good to finally put a face to the name." Marie Winters, petite and silver-haired, studied Alexander's face with unabashed interest. "You have Eleanor's forehead and chin," she observed, patting the empty chair beside her. "Come, sit with us. Sophie has been practicing non-stop knowing you'd be here." The casual acceptance from these strangers, this parallel family that had existed alongside his solitary life, disarmed Alexander completely. He had prepared himself for awkwardness, for stilted conversation, or even hostility. Instead, he found himself drawn into their orbit with surprising ease. "Is she nervous?" he asked, accepting the program Marie handed him. Rebecca laughed softly. "Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. She's never had so much family attend a recital before." Family. The word hung in the air between them, neither accepted nor rejected. "She's performing fourth," Marie explained, pointing to the program where Sophie's name appeared. Sophie Winters, Beethoven's Für Elise, and Mozart's Allegro in B-flat. She insisted on adding the Mozart piece just last week. Her teacher thought it too advanced, but Sophie can be quite determined. "A family trait," Robert commented with a knowing smile. "Eleanor was the same way, and from what we've read about Morgan Innovations, so are you." Before Alexander could respond, the lights dimmed, and a woman in her 50s approached the piano. "Welcome, families and friends, to our spring showcase," she began. "Our students have worked diligently this semester, and we're excited to share their progress with you today." The first three performers, children younger than Sophie, played simple pieces with varying degrees of success. The audience applauded encouragingly after each, parents beaming regardless of missed notes or hesitant tempos. When Sophie's name was called, Alexander felt an unexpected tension in his shoulders. She appeared from the wings wearing a navy blue dress with a white collar, her chestnut hair arranged in a neat French braid. She approached the piano with deliberate steps, adjusted the bench with precision, and sat with her back straight, just as Alexander had been taught as a child. She began with Für Elise, the familiar melody filling the room. Her small hands moved with surprising confidence, navigating the piece's more challenging sections with only minor hesitations. Alexander found himself leaning forward slightly, his breath held during particularly difficult passages. When she completed the Beethoven piece, the audience applauded warmly. Instead of standing to acknowledge the applause, Sophie repositioned her hands for the Mozart. This piece was indeed more technically demanding, with rapid scale passages and delicate ornamentations. Halfway through, her fingers faltered on a complex sequence, creating a brief dissonance. Alexander saw her shoulders tense. For a moment, it seemed she might stop. Without thinking, he leaned forward, willing her to continue. As if sensing his encouragement, Sophie took a barely perceptible breath and resumed playing, working through the difficult passage with renewed determination. Her recovery wasn't perfect, but her perseverance was unmistakable. When she finished, Alexander was the first to his feet, applauding with an enthusiasm that surprised even him. Sophie's eyes found him in the audience, her face breaking into a radiant smile at his standing ovation. She curtsied as her teacher had clearly instructed, but the dignified gesture dissolved into an excited little wave directed specifically at Alexander before she left the stage. "She's talented," Alexander said as he sat back down, aware of the inadequacy of the observation, but unsure what else to say. "She gets that from Eleanor," Rebecca replied. "And you, apparently. Mom mentioned you were quite accomplished as a teenager." Another piece of shared history Alexander hadn't known existed. He had indeed been a serious pianist throughout his school years, even considering a musical path before business and technology captured his interest. His mother had kept his trophies displayed long after he'd abandoned regular practice. The remaining performances passed in a blur, as Alexander's mind churned with revelations and connections. When the recital concluded, Sophie bounded up to their row, vibrating with energy. "Did you see? I messed up the Allegro section, but then I remembered what Ms. Abernathy said about not stopping no matter what." The words tumbled out as she looked expectantly at Alexander. "Did you like it?" "You showed remarkable composure," Alexander replied honestly. "That recovery demonstrated real musicianship." Sophie beamed at the specific praise. "Mom said you play too, way better than me. Maybe sometime you could teach me some techniques. Ms. Abernathy says my hand position needs work on the difficult runs." The direct request, so free of the calculation and hidden agendas that characterized most interactions in Alexander's world, caught him off guard. Before he could formulate a response, Robert Winters spoke up. "Sophie, remember what we discussed about giving people time?" he said gently. The girl's expression fell slightly. "Sorry, Mom said not to overwhelm you with too many questions or requests." "It's fine," Alexander found himself saying. "Actually, I'd be happy to show you some techniques my teacher shared with me." He glanced at Rebecca. "If that's all right with your mother." The look of surprised gratitude on Rebecca's face made something shift in Alexander's chest, a sensation both uncomfortable and strangely satisfying. "Before dinner," she agreed, "but not for too long. We don't want to turn what should be fun into work." As they gathered their belongings and moved toward the exit, Alexander felt a hand on his arm. Marie Winters had stopped him, her expression serious. "Eleanor made many mistakes," she said quietly, "but loving both her children wasn't one of them. She spoke of you often, always with pride." She squeezed his arm gently. "Family is complicated, Alexander. It's messy and imperfect, but it's also irreplaceable." Standing in that converted mansion, surrounded by people who were simultaneously strangers and his closest blood relations, Alexander Morgan, titan of industry, master of technology that connected millions, finally understood what his wealth and success had never been able to provide: the complicated, messy, irreplaceable connections that made a life truly complete. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn Sunday, Alexander stood in his kitchen, a space previously used so rarely that his housekeeper had once joked about removing the appliances to create more storage. Today, however, the gleaming countertops were covered with baking ingredients, recipe printouts, and the cheerful disarray that seemed to follow Sophie wherever she went. "You're not pressing hard enough," Sophie instructed, watching critically as Alexander attempted to form a pie crust. "Grandma Eleanor always said you have to be firm but gentle with pastry, like playing pianissimo on the piano." soft but with intention. Alexander adjusted his technique, surprised by how naturally Sophie had assumed the role of teacher in their relationship. Over the past months, he had taught her advanced fingering techniques for her piano pieces. In return, she had appointed herself his instructor in the domestic arts Eleanor had apparently mastered, but never shared with her son. "Mom, Uncle Alex is being too careful with the dough again," Sophie called toward the living room, where Rebecca was sorting through a box of Eleanor's photographs that Alexander had discovered in storage. "Let him learn his own way," Rebecca replied, appearing in the doorway with an old album in her hands. "That's what you always tell me when I try to help with your science projects." Alexander caught Rebecca's eye over Sophie's head, sharing a moment of amused understanding. Their relationship had evolved with cautious optimism. Initially formal meetings for Sophie's benefit, gradually giving way to more genuine connection. Alexander had been surprised by how much he enjoyed Rebecca's quick wit and practical perspective, so different from the calculated interactions that dominated his professional life. The weekly Sunday dinners had begun as Rebecca's suggestion, a way for Sophie to build a relationship with her uncle without expectations or pressure. The first few had been held at Rebecca's modest apartment, until Alexander had tentatively offered his penthouse as an alternative venue. To his surprise, both Rebecca and Sophie had accepted without the intimidation or envy he had feared his wealth might inspire. "I found something I think you should see," Rebecca said, placing the album on the counter away from the baking supplies. It was hidden behind Eleanor's other photo albums. The leather-bound book was unmarked, its pages yellowed with age. As Rebecca opened it, Alexander realized it contained photographs he had never seen before. Images of his mother with a dark-haired man who was neither Alexander's father nor anyone he recognized. "James Wilson," Rebecca said quietly, "my biological father. Your mother's—" "The man she loved," Alexander finished, studying the images with a mix of fascination and discomfort. In every photograph, his mother looked happier and more relaxed than in any memory Alexander possessed of her, laughing openly, her posture free of the rigid propriety she had maintained throughout his childhood. "According to what I could find, he moved to California after I was born, became a department chair at Berkeley, died of a heart attack in 2006. Rebecca turned a page to reveal more photos. Eleanor kept track of him through academic journals and mutual colleagues, but they never contacted each other again. Alexander absorbed this information, another piece of the complex puzzle that had been his mother's life. "She sacrificed her happiness for our security," he said, the realization settling heavily. "That's what parents do sometimes," Rebecca replied. Her gaze drifted to Sophie, who was now fully absorbed in crimping the pie crust with focused determination. "They make impossible choices, hoping they're choosing the least painful path." Alexander nodded, understanding both his mother's choices and Rebecca's gracious framing of them in a new light. As a parent herself, Rebecca had found a capacity for forgiveness that still occasionally eluded him. "I've been meaning to discuss something with you," he said, lowering his voice. "Morgan Innovations is establishing an educational foundation, full scholarships for promising students interested in medical technology and innovative patient care approaches. I'd like to name it after Eleanor." Rebecca's expression softened. She would have appreciated that. "There's more," Alexander continued, choosing his words carefully. "The foundation needs a director, someone with both medical knowledge and administrative capability, someone who understands the human element of healthcare, not just the technological solutions." Understanding dawned in Rebecca's eyes. "Alexander, are you offering me a job?" "I'm proposing a partnership," he clarified. "Your nursing experience provides insights my engineers lack. You understand patient needs in ways our developers don't. Your contribution would be invaluable." He hesitated, And the position comes with flexibility for family obligations and a salary that would eliminate your need for night shifts." Rebecca was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Is this charity?" she finally asked, her direct approach reminiscent of their mother. "Because I don't need..." "It's strategy," Alexander interrupted. "Morgan Innovations needs your perspective, and you need a position that values your expertise without requiring impossible hours. The fact that it benefits my niece is a secondary consideration." He allowed a small smile, though admittedly a compelling one. Rebecca studied him with the penetrating gaze that had become familiar over their months of cautious reconnection. "I'll need to see the full proposal before deciding," she said finally. "And we'd have to establish clear professional boundaries." "Of course," Alexander agreed, relief mixing with unexpected happiness. The prospect of working with Rebecca, of bringing her officially into the Morgan legacy that should have included her from the beginning, felt like correcting a long-standing imbalance. "The pie is ready for filling," Sophie announced triumphantly, stepping back from her creation with flour-dusted hands. "Mom, can we show Uncle Alex the surprise now?" Rebecca nodded, her serious expression giving way to measured excitement. "Go get it from my bag." Sophie dashed from the kitchen, returning moments later with a large envelope. "We were going to wait until after dinner," she explained, bouncing slightly on her toes, "but I don't think I can wait that long." Alexander raised an eyebrow at Rebecca, who gestured for him to open the envelope. Inside, he found legal documents, court filings he immediately recognized despite not being a lawyer himself. "Petition for legal name change," he read aloud, scanning the document. Sophie Elizabeth Winters was requesting to legally become Sophie Elizabeth Winters Morgan. Alexander looked up, momentarily speechless, a rare condition for a man who made his living through persuasive communication. "It was her idea," Rebecca explained quickly. "I wanted you to know that. She came to me about it last month." "You're my family," Sophie said, with the straightforward clarity that continued to disarm Alexander at every turn. "Mom said it's my choice what name I use, and I want to honor both sides of my family." She twisted her flour-covered hands together nervously. "Is that okay?" Alexander set the documents carefully on the counter and knelt to Sophie's eye level, something he'd learned from watching Rebecca parent. "It would be my greatest honor," he said, his voice unexpectedly rough with emotion. Sophie launched herself into his arms, covering his custom-tailored shirt with flower handprints that would have once annoyed him, but now seemed a perfect metaphor for how this child had irreversibly marked his life. "There's one other thing," Rebecca said, when Sophie finally released him. "The court date for the name change is on December 15th, which happens to be Mother's birthday," Alexander finished. The synchronicity seemed appropriate. A new beginning commemorating the woman whose complicated choices had both separated and ultimately united them. As Sophie returned to her baking mission and Rebecca began sorting the photographs into piles for preservation, Alexander was struck by the profound transformation of his living space. The penthouse that had once been a showcase of minimalist design and cutting-edge technology had gradually accumulated evidence of a messier, more complicated life. Sophie's piano books stacked beside business journals, Rebecca's medical reference texts sharing shelf space with his technology publications, family photographs interspersed with his industry awards. Eleanor had been right in her final letter. He had built an empire of technology, but only now was he building something truly enduring. 1 year to the day after their first meeting at Eleanor's grave, Alexander Morgan stood once again in Oakwood Memorial Gardens. The autumn air carried the same crisp scent of fallen leaves, but this time he was not alone. Rebecca stood to his right, Sophie between them, their breaths visible in the cool morning air as they gazed at Eleanor's headstone. In the past year, Alexander had learned more about his mother than in all his previous 52 years combined. Through Rebecca's stories, Sophie's innocent observations, and the winter's warm recollections, Eleanor had emerged as a more complex and human figure than the reserved, proper woman he had known. The mother who had maintained their secret separation had also preserved each connection in the only ways she felt she could. Telling Rebecca stories of Alexander's achievements, encouraging Sophie's musical talents that mirrored her uncle's, keeping photographs and mementos of both her children close. "Should I put the flowers now?" Sophie asked, clutching a carefully arranged bouquet of white lilies, interspersed with sprigs of rosemary. "For remembrance," she had explained with solemn importance when selecting them at the florist. "Go ahead," Rebecca said softly. They watched as Sophie stepped forward and placed the bouquet against the headstone, her movements having acquired a graceful precision over the past months of piano lessons with Alexander. At 9 years old, she carried herself with a confidence that reminded Alexander of both his mother and Rebecca. "Hi, Grandma," Sophie said to the granite marker. "We're all here together now, just like you wanted. Uncle Alex is teaching me Chopin, and Mom is helping sick kids get better technology at his company. I got the highest math score in my class, and Mr. and Mrs. Winters are teaching Uncle Alex how to fish, which is really funny to watch." Alexander smiled at this last detail. Robert Winters had indeed insisted on including him in the family's annual summer fishing trip to Maine, an experience that had forced the CEO to confront his complete incompetence at an activity that seemed to come naturally to both Sophie and the elderly man. The humbling experience had been strangely freeing. The Morgan Winters Medical Innovation Scholarship has its first recipients starting at Harvard Medical School this fall, Rebecca added, addressing the headstone as naturally as her daughter did. 5 brilliant students who otherwise couldn't afford their education. The youngest is a girl from Dorchester who reminds me of that student you always talked about, the one who challenged all your mathematical proofs. Teresa Jan, Alexander supplied, the name surfacing from stories his mother had told during his childhood. Mother kept in touch with her until Teresa passed away in 2015. I found their correspondence when we were cleaning out the townhouse. The townhouse, Eleanor's Beacon Hill residence, had been the most recent bridge between their formerly separate lives. After months of discussion, Alexander and Rebecca had made the decision to renovate it as a shared family space, rather than selling it. The project had given them a neutral ground for collaboration, allowing them to navigate their evolving relationship through practical decisions about architectural details and furnishings, rather than forced emotional conversations. "I have something to show you both," Alexander said, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box and opened it to reveal an elegant silver locket. Not his mother's worn one, but a new piece created by a renowned Boston jeweler. "I had this made." Rebecca took the box, examining the locket with careful fingers. "It's beautiful." "Open it," Alexander encouraged. Inside, the locket contained 3 miniature photographs arranged in a triptych. Eleanor in her younger years, Rebecca and Sophie together, and Alexander. The 3 images formed a complete circle when the locket was fully opened. "I thought Sophie might like to have it," Alexander said, uncharacteristically uncertain, as a tangible reminder that her grandmother connected all of us, even when we didn't know it. Sophie accepted the locket with reverent hands. "Will you help me put it on, Mom?" As Rebecca fastened the chain around her daughter's neck, Alexander noticed a woman and young boy approaching from the cemetery paths. The boy, perhaps 5 years old, holding a small bunch of wildflowers clearly picked by childish hands. The woman hesitated when she saw them gathered at Eleanor's grave. "I'm sorry," she said, beginning to turn away. "We can come back later." Alexander recognized her immediately, Teresa Jan's daughter, Amy. He had met her briefly at his mother's funeral and again when establishing a memorial scholarship in Teresa's name at MIT. "Please join us," he called. "Mother would have wanted that." As Amy and his son approached, Sophie stepped forward with the natural diplomacy of childhood. "Hello, I'm Sophie Winters Morgan. Did you know my grandma too?" "She was my mother's favorite professor," Amy explained, her expression softening. "She was like family to us. After my mother passed away, your grandmother kept checking on us. She never missed Liam's birthday." Alexander exchanged glances with Rebecca, another piece of their mother's complex life clicking into place. Eleanor Morgan had created a network of connections, some born of obligation, others of genuine affection, all maintained with the meticulous care that had defined her approach to life. "We are having a small gathering at Eleanor's townhouse," Rebecca said spontaneously, "to commemorate the anniversary of her passing. You and Liam would be welcome to join us." Amy looked surprised but pleased by the invitation. "We'd like that, thank you." As the expanded group made their way toward the cemetery gates, Sophie slipped her hand into Alexander's with the easy confidence of established trust. "Grandma would be happy today, don't you think?" Alexander considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. The past year had been a journey of reconciliation, not just with Rebecca and Sophie, but with the complex legacy his mother had left behind. The woman who had maintained painful separations had also, in her own way, tried to protect what she valued most. Her choices had been imperfect, but her love had been genuine. "Yes," he said finally, "I think she would be very happy." At the cemetery entrance, Alexander's driver waited with the town car, while Rebecca's practical Honda was parked along the street. Without discussion, they all got into the town car: Alexander, Rebecca, Sophie, Amy, and Liam, a spontaneous gathering of Eleanor's fragmented family finally brought together. As they drove through Boston's autumn-painted streets toward the Beacon Hill townhouse, where Marie and Robert Winters would be waiting with hot cider and Eleanor's famous apple tart recipe, Alexander reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken. The man who had once valued control and predictability above all else now found himself at the center of a messy, complicated, wonderful family network that expanded in unexpected ways. Morgan Innovations continued to thrive, of course. The company's latest artificial intelligence platform was revolutionizing personalized medicine, guided now by Rebecca's insights into patient care. Alexander remained its visionary leader, but his ruthless work schedule had given way to a more balanced approach that included piano lessons, Sunday dinners, and fishing trips to Maine. Sophie leaned against his arm, her new locket catching the sunlight, as she pointed out landmarks to young Liam. "That's where Mom and I first had ice cream with Uncle Alex," she explained, indicating a cafe they were passing. "He didn't know that you're supposed to eat ice cream even when it's cold outside." I maintain that was a reasonable position," Alexander replied with mock seriousness, earning a chorus of disagreement from both children. Rebecca caught his eye above their heads, her expression reflecting his own thoughts: amazement at how completely their lives had transformed, gratitude for the connections they had found, and perhaps a touch of forgiveness for the woman whose complicated choices had both separated and ultimately united them. As the car turned onto Beacon Hill's picturesque streets, Alexander felt a sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with the physical destination. His mother had been right in her final letter. He had indeed built something more enduring than any technology, a family chosen not through obligation, but through understanding, forgiveness, and love. "Next week is Mom's birthday," Sophie announced to the car at large. "We're having a special dinner at Uncle Alex's penthouse. You and Liam should come, Miss Amy." The casual invitation, so characteristic of Sophie's generous spirit, brought a smile to Amy's face. "We'd be honored," she replied, looking to Alexander for confirmation. "Absolutely," he agreed, already mentally rearranging his schedule to ensure he'd be free to prepare Sophie's favorite pasta himself, rather than relying on his chef. Some priorities had become very clear over the past year. As they arrived at the townhouse, the front door opened to reveal Robert and Marie Winters, welcoming them with warm smiles. The scent of cinnamon and apples wafted into the crisp autumn air, mingling with the rustle of fallen leaves beneath their feet. Alexander Morgan, once America's most successful solitary genius, took Sophie's hand in his right and gestured Amy and Liam forward with his left, stepping into the warmth of the home that had once belonged exclusively to his mother, but now held space for all of them. The journey that had begun with a chance encounter at a cemetery had led not to an ending, but to a new beginning, one that honored the past while embracing a future richer than he could have imagined. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment letting us know what you thought. We'd love to hear your suggestions for future story themes. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys like this one. Your support means everything to us.